Hey everybody, Mark Dawes here, and today I want to talk to you about physical intervention and self-harm because I've just received a really interesting email from someone, and if you bear with me, I'd like to read it to you and then I'll give you my response to the email. But it raises some really interesting points as to whether staff should or should not intervene when a patient or service user is using an edged weapon or a sharp instrument to actually harm themselves with. So this is the email I got. It says, "Hi Mark, I hope you are well. I was hoping that you could help me with some advice. We have a number of service users that are all self-harming, and there have been a number of times where staff intervened. In one of the incidents, it was reported that staff involved panicked and were unsure of what action, if any, to take. What I have been asked to clarify is their position both legally and morally. If a client is standing with, for example, a piece of glass that they are intending or even threatening to use for self-harming purposes, would this be sufficient grounds for physical intervention? As the weapon is predominantly intended for self-harm, is this posing a threat to others? Could an attempt for physical intervention escalate the situation where the weapon could be used as a defence against the staff? And I realise that this could be seen as case specific, and the mental state, history and circumstances would play a major role in this. I would also appreciate any other issues that you feel could arise from this type of situation, as we are looking to put the PI side of things in policy. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your reply." Well, there's some quite interesting points that's raised there as to, obviously vulnerable people who are self-harming with, in some cases, sharp instruments such as a knife, broken piece of glass, etc. Now, I've dealt with this in the past. I've helped organisations set up policies and procedures for this in the past. So this is my response that I've given this gentleman who actually sent me that email. It says, "Hi, good to hear from you. Firstly, what training has the organisation provided for staff on self-harm, and what is the company policy on service users who self-harm? I ask because in many cases it is sometimes better to possibly have a procedure that lets the service user self-harm in a controlled and clean environment, as opposed to trying to stop them, as that could drive the behaviour underground. Once again, I would presume that the risk assessment and specific service users' behavioural care plans would need to be reviewed and looked at here. With regard to your comment, if a client is standing with, for example, a piece of glass that they are intending or even threatening to use for self-harming purposes, would this be sufficient grounds for physical intervention? Please note the following. Possibly, but, and this is a big but, you need to consider that the physical intervention itself now creates additional hazards, such as the risk of the service user struggling, thus increasing the risk of harm to themselves and or the staff, because in these situations the implement being used for self-harm could easily be used to harm others. Also, what if during the struggle staff get cut and are contaminated by any blood-borne viruses from the patient, brackets hepatitis B, C, HIV, etc., close brackets? Are the staff up to date on their inoculations, etc.? If the organisation makes the decision that staff need to intervene, then protective equipment, such as shields for example, need to be considered, as well as protective kit for staff that should be issued and worn. Staff also have no obligation to intervene if the situation is classed as one of serious and imminent danger, which is under Regulation 8 of the Management of Health and Safety Work Regulations 1999. And they are also protected under that regulation, as well as sections 44 and 100 of the Employment Rights Act 1996. There are also human rights to consider here, such as Article 2, brackets 1 of the Human Rights Act, which is the positive obligation to preserve life. Again, all of the above, and that is not an exhaustive list, must be covered by the risk assessment, especially as intervening where a knife, edged weapon, needle and blood bodily fluids are present. This is a potentially very high risk situation and possibly even a life-threatening one. Let me know if that helps and come back to me if you need any more advice." So there you have it. I mean, obviously staff care very much about their patients, and in this case there are staff who want to help a vulnerable patient who is actually causing themselves self-harm. But the fact of the matter remains, that in itself is a risk, and the physical intervention then adds to that. It could be creating additional risks if staff go in, so therefore staff have to have the right equipment, the right training, the right inoculations and so on and so forth. So it's not just a matter of staff being expected to intervene. Now, if patients on units are self-harming, this is a foreseeable risk, and the risk assessment is the absolute hub for all of this. That's the piece of documentation that is crucial and critical to deciding how you manage these things. So all the stuff I put in there are suggestions. They're things I think the organisation needs to look at, but it goes back to the risk assessment, not just the behavioural care plan and the patient's risk assessment. You've got to have a risk assessment for the activity of using physical intervention when a patient is self-harming with the appropriate control measures, and that risk assessment must be done by a suitably qualified and or competent person with suitable experience in this area who understands what they're talking about and involves other staff as well. So anyway, I hope that helps. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'll be delighted to see them and reply to them. And if you want to share this with anyone that you think this might be useful to, please share it far and wide. Thanks ever so much. I look forward to hearing from you and speaking to you all again soon.